American history, but we haven't been able to go on the field trips we would normally do together. So I've decided to bring you on a virtual field trip with me. I'm here at Faneuil Hall in Boston. We're going to go through the original Patriots Day, which happened on April 19th, 1775. But in order to do that, we need to go back to the place where it all started. I'm here at the site of the Boston Massacre. This happened 5 years before in 1770. British soldiers opened musket fire on a mob, ended up killing 5 people. This event triggered a series of events that resulted in the British Crown sending thousands of soldiers over to put down the rising rebellion. It's now 5 years later. Boston has been occupied by British soldiers. The British soldiers have heard that the colonists have been amassing and stockpiling weapons and that they're in Concord. They make a decision that on April 18th, 1775, they're going to march all night out to Concord and seize the munitions that are hidden there. Meanwhile, Paul Revere has gotten intelligence from spies that the plan is for the British soldiers to cross the Boston Harbor. They are going by sea. Using a prearranged signal, Paul Revere came here to the Old North Church. He asked the sexton to hang 2 lanterns in the belfry windows. This was to be a backup plan in case Paul Revere got arrested in Boston for leaving after curfew. This would signal to everyone else that the British were arriving by sea. Luckily, he did not get arrested. There was someone waiting to row him across the harbor. There was a fresh horse waiting for him on the other side, and that's what began the famous ride of Paul Revere to Lexington. Welcome to Lexington. I'm here on the Lexington Common. Behind me is the statue of the Minuteman militia soldier. And to honor that time and the soldiers, I've got my own tricorn hat. So Paul Revere has ridden through the night and just arrived here at Lexington. The British regulars' mission is to go to look for weapons that are hidden around, but the rumor was that the British were going to come to Lexington to arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock. That's what Paul Revere writes out here and warns those 2 men about. The British are coming and they're going to arrest you. Having been warned, Adams and Hancock leave Lexington, but John Parker, commander of the Lexington militia, commands all of his militiamen to meet here at the Lexington Common. The men waited here for hours. It took the British all night to walk from Boston to here. They arrived about 4:30 in the morning. Meanwhile, the militiamen gathered in parade formation just to show that they would not be intimidated. The militia are lined up right here. On this side, the British has 1 company of light infantrymen lined up, and on this side, 3 companies of light infantrymen lined up. The British commander orders the militiamen to put down their weapons and disperse. The militiaman's commander also orders his men to disperse, but he doesn't tell them to put down their weapons. They don't hear very well. There's some confusion that ensues, and in all of that melee, a shot goes off. We still don't know to this day who fired that shot or where it came from. The British never did give a command to fire, but some of the British soldiers were skittish and started firing and charging with their bayonets. As a result, 8 militiamen were killed that day. Note that at this point, neither commander on either side had given a command to fire, and yet we've got militiamen who are dead and wounded. The British soldiers regrouped here on the Common. They fired a volley of victory into the air and then marched on to Concord. Welcome to Concord. This morning, the soldiers were in Lexington. At about 5 o'clock in the morning, they left and walked the 7 miles to Concord. They gathered in the middle of the town there and then dispersed so that they could go out into the countryside and look for the munitions that they had heard were being secreted here. They looked at all of the farms around in the area, but the colonists had heard that they would be coming to look for the weapons, and so they had hidden them all in different places, some under piles of dung, some weapons were under piles of hay, and others at just different cities and farms. When the soldiers did all of their searching, they really didn't find anything, so they gathered back here at the river. The British gathered on this side of the bridge. Meanwhile, the militiamen were gathering over here. They looked up and saw smoke coming from Concord and incorrectly assumed that the British were burning down the town. They were gathering together. The British were gathering over here. They started taking apart the bridge to prevent the militiamen from coming across it, but they also were lined up ready to fire. One of the British soldiers fired into the water. We don't know if it was an accident or if he was trying to scare them, but with that first shot, the British started firing. The first volley of shots killed 2 militiamen. This statue commemorates all Minutemen, but in particular Isaac Davis. He was one of 2 soldiers who was killed at this first skirmish. The plow in the statue is actually an exact replica of the plow that he used, and it signifies that these militiamen were just farmers. They weren't trained. They were up against the greatest, most imperial army in the world who had been really well trained. Another soldier was killed instantly at this same site. Seeing 2 of his men fallen, Major John Buttrick, the commander of the Concord militia, issued the command for all of his men to fire. His words were, "Fire, my fellow soldiers, in heaven's name, fire." You've heard of the shot heard around the world. This is that moment. This is where it came from. Why? Because his order to fire on the British regulars was not only an act of treason, but it was also a declaration of war. This gravesite marks the spot where 2 British soldiers who were killed at that skirmish were buried and rest here still. When the British saw that their men were getting killed, they were very surprised. They decided to beat a hasty retreat back to Concord this way, to gather there. Once they got there with their other fellow soldiers, they decided that they'd march back to Boston. Along the way, as they were walking along the road, militiamen came from all the surrounding towns, 4,000 of them. They harried, they harassed the soldiers. This day was the day of no turning back. This day marked the beginning of what would be 3,000 days of war. This has been a quick overview of the events that happened on this day. We'll include some resources for you so that you can investigate these things more fully with family or friends. Thanks for being with me today. Signing off, this is Mrs. McQuivey.